Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Combs, and I want to continue to talk about elements of poetry. And in this video, we'll talk about imagery and figurative language. So let's talk about imagery first. Imagery is the use of words and phrases that appeal to the five senses. Now, I know that technically there are many more senses than five, and I know you've probably heard that, but we're going to focus on the five senses that we usually hear about in early elementary school. And writers use imagery to help the reader experience the same things they have experienced. Poets and writers want the reader to see the same things they have seen, to hear the same things they have heard, to smell the same things they have smelled, and to taste the same things they have tasted, and also to feel the same things they have felt. And according to Roberts and Jacobs, as you form mental pictures from a poet's images, you also respond with appropriate attitudes and feelings. So the idea is a poet will use a certain phrase or word that causes you to remember a smell, maybe, or to have the sensation of a smell, and that smell will cause you to have a certain attitude or certain feelings. So if someone mentions, for example, the campfire, then you might, as a reader, think about the smell of the campfire and the smell of burning wood and the smell of grass and dirt and maybe pine trees from a forest that you are in while you are sitting around the campfire, and you might feel relaxed. You might feel close to nature like you do when you're camping. So you might have those feelings and attitudes. So, for this reason, imagery must be vivid to have any real effect. Rather than stating, for example, I heard bees buzzing, I mean that's not very vivid. That just tells you what's happening. A poet might describe the sound as the unintelligible syllables. It's like a Roman mob, small taken one by one, but my God, together, as Sylvia Plath does in her poem, The Arrival of the Bee Box. So let's look at a poem by John Updike. This poem is September, and I want to read it. And as I read it, if you have your journal, maybe jot down some of the phrases and words that cause you to feel, that cause you to remember tastes and sounds and sights that you might see. And let's see, what's the other? Which one am I missing? So taste, sound, sight, feeling, and oh, smells. Sorry about that. Okay, so September. The breezes taste of apple peel. The air is full of smells to feel, ripe fruit, old footballs, burning brush, new books, erasers, chalk, and such. The bee his hive, well honeyed hum, and mother cuts chrysanthemums. Like plates washed clean with suds, the days are polished with the morning haze. So, what were some of the words in that poem that causes you to use your five senses? All right, let's look at a few of the things that I saw in this poem. Well, first of all, Updike says the breezes taste of apple peel, and I think that apple peel has a certain taste, right? I mean, I like apples, but sometimes the apple peel is what is it can be tasty as well, right? So I get that whenever I see that, I can remember, I can call up that sense of the taste of apple peel. And actually, it reminds me of being in school in September and going to the apple orchard. And when I lived in Michigan as a boy, we would not really go to the pumpkin patch in October. I know sometimes around here, when my cousin uh, was in school, they would go, her class would go to the pumpkin patch. But we would go when I lived in Michigan to the apple orchard every September as a school trip, and we would have apple cider and those donuts, those plain donuts that don't have any sugar or any chocolate or anything on them. And we would go out to the apple orchard and pick apples and have all kinds of activities with apples. And in fact, one time I went to the apple orchard with my cousin, and he threw an apple and it hit me in the nose. And I don't think it broke my nose, but I did have a nosebleed. But so I didn't know that I was going to tell you all that just now. But what happened was I read this line from John Updike, and I had that memory. And I bring that memory to this poem about September. And I think that's what poets are after. They want you to have those types of feelings and those types of memories and those types of associations when you read their poetry. So Updike also refers to smells, and he talks about smells to feel, and that's sort of a weird thing. Smelling, feeling. How can you smell or feel smells, right? So that is something that we might call a non sequitur, and that's when something doesn't go together. Uh, but it can reveal or make you think about things in a new way. So smells to feel. How might you feel a certain smell? So ripe fruit, old footballs, and that I can smell an old football right now, and another thing that it makes me smell probably, or makes me think about probably even more than an old football, is a glove, like a glove if you're playing baseball or playing catch with your dad. I can smell that. I can call up that smell right now, and that's another thing that this another memory that this poem is making me feel. Burning brush, new books, erasers, chalk, and such. So those are all the smells. And then the bee, his hive, well honeyed hum, and that appeals to my sense of hearing. Hearing the bees buzz, the well honeyed hum, and that also sort of gives me a visual. When I think of well honeyed, I think about honey and the yellow or the golden look of honey, but then also of bees that are sort of buzzing around their hive, going out and getting nectar and bringing it back and making honey. And mother cuts chrysanthemums. That's a visual image, I think, but I think it also can be uh, an image that you hear because, or imagery that causes you to hear because you can hear the swish of the scissors or of the knife as mother cuts the chrysanthemum flowers. Like plates washed clean with suds, the days are polished with a morning haze. And again, that makes me see the plates washed clean, the visual of clean plates. All right, let's talk about figurative language. So, language can be used literally. If you state that your best friend is climbing the walls, you could possibly mean that he or she is actually traveling up and down the walls of the room. But more often, language is used figuratively. We say things and we describe things that aren't really happening or that aren't really true, but they reveal something or they help us to describe and they help us to compare. So when you say, my friend is climbing the walls, my friend was climbing the walls, you more than likely mean, though, that your friend is extremely bored or anxious and upset. And when you use the phrase climbing the walls to mean bored or anxious instead of to mean traveling up and down the wall, you are using language figuratively. And according to Robert Eaglestone, a figure of speech is the use of words or a phrase in a way that isn't strictly true. Figurative language is all around us. You are just as likely to encounter it while reading a magazine or newspaper article or talking to friends as you are when reading literature. So, for example, we say things like the arm of a chair. Well, chairs really, they don't really have arms, but we have made that comparison so often that it's now part of our everyday speech. So, the arm of a chair is an example of figurative language. And according to Robert and Jacobs, it would be difficult to find any good writing that does not use figurative language to some degree. However, they state that such language is most vital in imaginative writing, particularly poetry, where it compresses thought, promotes understanding, and shapes responses. So, the reason why we're talking about figurative language in the poetry unit is because this is where figurative language or figures of speech shine. This is where we can highlight them because poetry is relatively brief when compared to short stories like we studied before. So we can actually investigate and dissect and really understand what is meant by figurative language as we read poems. Now, I'm sure that if you go back to the short stories, you will find several of the figures of speech that we're going to talk about in a minute in the literature or in the short stories that we read before. But we're going to talk about these in poetry. So there are many different types of figurative language, and some of the most common figures of speech are the simile. A simile is a comparison between two basically unlike things using the words like or as. So let's say a child looks up at the sky and says, "That cloud is fluffy like cotton candy." That's a comparison. Clouds and cotton candy are not very similar. They're basically unlike each other. One is made of sugar that's been spun, one is made of condensation or whatever a cloud is made of. But if a child says that cloud is fluffy like cotton candy, the child is making a comparison using the word like, and he or she is using a simile. The writer Vladimir Nabokov uses a simile in his line, "Elderly American ladies leaning on their canes listed toward me like towers of Pisa." So the ladies are sort of listing toward the narrator of Nabokov's work, like towers of Pisa. So comparing the leaning ladies to this tower in the city of Pisa that is leaning or slanting. A metaphor is a comparison between two unlike things, but you don't use like or as. A metaphor states that one thing is another. So Shakespeare uses a metaphor when he states, "Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines." So there, instead of using like or as, he's basically saying that the sun is the eye of heaven. So he's comparing the sun to an eye. And a metaphor is also used in the saying, "Failure is an orphan with no takers." So failure is an orphan. And that suggests that no one wants failure, right? No one wants to deal with failure. No one wants to admit to failure or to invite failure in, excuse me. So that is something that comes more from every day. Like your uncle who's always saying truisms or something might say, "Failure is an orphan with no takers," right? And I'm sure that you have heard people use metaphors in everyday life all the time. Another figure of speech is personification. And personification is the attribution of human qualities to something non human, so an animal or an object. So in Sylvia Plath's poem Mirror, the speaker is a mirror, And the speaker states, most of the time I meditate on the opposite wall. Well, mirrors really can't speak, they can't meditate. So when gives the mirror that ability, then she is using personification. And I'm sure you've heard frustrated coworkers maybe using personification when they say, my computer throws a fit every time I try to download this file. I know I've said that. Well, your computer really can't throw a fit. People throw fits, not computers. So we're using personification to describe the computer. So another figure of speech is a symbol, and a symbol is a person, place, object, or event that stands for something greater than itself. And I think this one is is easier to understand than most because we have symbols all of the time in our daily lives. Let's think about the eagle. What does the eagle represent to Americans? Right? It represents America. The eagle represents America that flies high and is a bird of prey. So Americans, they get what they want. They are active. The American flag is a symbol that represents freedom and patriotism. We've actually had some discussion of certain symbols in the news lately where we've had statues that have been removed because they of what they represent. Statues are removed from the town square or removed from these places of prominence because they represent people who have values that we no longer have in America. And sometimes there is some disagreement about whether a symbol should stay or it should not stay. But a symbol is simply something that stands for itself, but also something greater than itself. So let's look at the poem To a Daughter Leaving Home by Linda Paston. I think that's how you say her name, Paston. I'm terrible with names. And let's think about the symbol in this poem. So I'll read it, and I think that the speaker here is Linda Paston. I think it's a mother who is, if not Paston herself, it is a mother who is thinking about her daughter leaving home. So the mother says, or I guess it could be a father too, but I just think it's a mother because Paston is a woman. But but actually maybe I shouldn't because as we've seen before, female poets can write in the voice or the persona of a male and vice versa. So, to a daughter leaving home. When I taught you at 8 to ride a bicycle, loping along beside you as you wobbled away on two round wheels, my own mouth rounding in surprise when you pulled ahead down the curved path of the park, I kept waiting for the thud of your crash as I sprinted to catch up, while you grew smaller, more breakable with distance, pumping for your life, screaming with laughter, the hair flapping behind you like a handkerchief waving goodbye. So in this poem, the daughter riding away from her mother on a bicycle, that event happened. That event, it represents itself, but it also comes to represent to the mother the daughter growing up and leaving home. And as her daughter got farther and farther away and smaller and smaller and smaller in the mother's vision, she relates that to her daughter moving farther and farther and farther away in life. And the mother is not there to help her through hard times when she leaves home. So she has the same sort of feelings that she had that day as she taught her daughter to ride the bicycle that she has as her daughter leaves home. And I love the image of the hair flapping behind her, like a handkerchief waving goodbye, right? Uh, that's just it's a nice poem. I'm not a mother, I'm not a father, I don't have children, but it seems like I can relate to that as a child leaving home. I can sort of think that my parents maybe felt the same way. Although I will say that when I went away to college, my mom and dad did take down my bed instantly and make a storage room out of my bedroom. And when I came back to visit from college, I had to sleep in my grandparents' guest room. So I'm not sure what that says. Maybe my parents were ready for me to go. All right. What about illusion? An allusion is a reference to a work of literature or a well known historical event, person, or place in order to give a fuller understanding of one thing by helping the reader to see it in terms of something he or she knows better. So, the key with allusions is if you're going to use an allusion, you have to make sure that your reader will recognize and fully understand. So, like I say here, when they use an allusion, authors expect their readers to recognize and fully understand the thing, person, or place that is alluded to and relate its meaning to the new context. So, what you might say is when you were cleaning out your garage over the weekend, it was a Herculean task, and you're alluding to the Roman myth of Hercules, and a lot of times people think that's a Greek myth. Well, it is a Greek myth, but Hercules is the Roman name. Heracles is actually the Greek name of that hero. So when you say that it was a Herculean task, you want them to understand that the task was almost impossible to complete because in the myth of Hercules, he had 12 labors that were almost impossible to complete. Likewise, in his novella Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad alludes to the Greek fates, the old crones from mythology who measured out the lives of humans, weaving out their destinies on a great loom. And so he refers to these ladies by describing a scene in which two knitting women seem to know what will happen to the narrator. So they seem to know what will happen next, and they're knitting, and that calls to the reader's mind the fates from Greek mythology. So it allows us to maybe think about those ladies in terms of maybe they do know something that they're not saying. So the next few are not as common, but I think they're still worth mentioning. Well, they are as common, but they are common, but we don't talk about them as much as we talk about similes and metaphors. They're not studied as much, but I think that you will find that if you think about your speech, if you think about things you've read, you will see them pop up. But they're not as commonly pointed out, I guess, is what I want to say. And the first one is a synecdoche. And a synecdoche is when a writer uses part of something to stand for the whole, or uses the whole thing to stand for the part. So, for example, if you said, I just bought a new set of wheels, you probably mean a car, right? So you're using a synecdoche because you're referring to wheels to mean or to stand in for the entire car. So if you ask someone to break bread with you, you are using a synecdoche, using bread, part of a meal, to represent the entire meal you want to share. Likewise, when a news anchor states that the U.S. won another gold medal at the Olympics, he or she is using a synecdoche, using the entire U.S. population to refer to a part, the citizens who are on that particular team. Frank R. Stockton refers to face to represent people in the following line. His eyes met hers as she sat there paler and whiter than anyone in the vast ocean of anxious faces about her. So she's not in a vast ocean of faces only. These faces are attached to people. So she's in a crowd of people, basically. But Stockton focuses just on the faces. And incidentally, when he says the vast ocean of faces, he's using a metaphor relating a crowd to an ocean. And so, why might you relate a crowd to an ocean? Because a crowd is forceful and powerful. A bunch of people moving together is as forceful and powerful as an ocean might be, as water. A lot of water. A lot of water is very destructive and very powerful. Another one that we don't usually mention, but I thought was worth mentioning, is a mentonomy or metonymy. Sometimes I make a mistake and say men, but there's no N there between the E and T. So metonymy. And a metonymy is when you substitute one thing for something that is closely related to it. So if I say the pen is mightier than the sword, that uses metonymy, since the pen is used in place of words of negotiation, and the sword is used in place of physical combat. So what you're saying when you say the pen is mightier than the sword is you're saying that sometimes talking it out is a better way to resolve issues than fighting, but I'm using the pen to relate to talking or words, and the sword to relate to physical combat. So those are being used in place of the actual things I am talking about, the actual, I guess, concepts or methods I'm talking about. Robert Frost makes use of a metonymy in the following passage. As he swung toward them, holding up the hand, half in appeal, but half as if to keep the life from spilling. So as he swung toward them, holding up the hand, half in appeal, but half as if to keep the life from spilling. So he uses life, but what does he really mean there? He means blood, right? Someone is trying to block themselves from being um, harmed, right? From blood being spilled. But he represents blood using the word life, since life and blood are closely related. So that's a metonymy, not mentonomy. Excuse me for making that error earlier. And there's also an apostrophe. An apostrophe, and this is a little confusing because we also have a punctuation mark that is called an apostrophe. But an apostrophe in literary studies happens when a writer addresses something imaginary or something or someone who is not present. So if you've watched the Disney film The Hunchback of Notre Dame, you know that at the beginning of his song Hellfire, Frollo sings, Beata Maria, you know I am a righteous man. Of my virtue I am justly proud. And he's speaking to the Virgin Mary. He's actually praying to the Virgin Mary. And so the Virgin Mary is not there in the room with him. She's not present, so he's using an apostrophe. Likewise, John Donne addresses death in one of his poems, saying, Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. So death is not there in the room with him. And in fact, death is not a person. Death is not something you can address. Death is an event, right? So when we think about death maybe as the Grim Reaper, that's something that's imaginary. That's an imaginary construct that we have come up with to think about death. And so that is using an apostrophe when you refer to or address something that's imaginary or something or someone who is not present. So this one is hyperbole, and hyperbole is an exaggeration used to create a certain effect. And one of my favorite hyperboles is in the folktale about Paul Bunyan, when the narrator uses hyperbole when he describes the winter being so cold that all spoken words froze solid before they could be heard. And so someone in the myth or the folktale calls out, and the other person doesn't hear what they call out until spring because the words froze in the air, the sound froze in the air, and it didn't unthaw until spring. That's a hyperbole. That really doesn't happen. That's an exaggeration of how cold it was. So a teenager whose parents show up at a party to drag her out by her ear uses a hyperbole when she tells her best friend on the phone, "I was dying from shame." So she may have been really ashamed, but the shame wasn't actually causing her to physically die. So that is definitely hyperbole. And so if we have hyperbole, we also have something called understatement. And sometimes you'll see understatement called litites, but I think understatement is, we'll use understatement for our purposes. When a writer uses understatement, he or she deliberately underplays or undervalues a thing to create emphasis. So this image from Monty Python and the Holy Grail makes use of understatement. The Black Knight is calling attention to just how bad his injury is by downplaying it. So his arm has been chopped off, and he looks and he says, "'Tis but a scratch." Well, it's more than a scratch, right? But he is trying to, first of all, call attention to how bad it actually is, or call attention to his strength and his ability to deal, because he just considers this a scratch. Also, if in the film Kill Bill Volume One, if you all remember that film, it's kind of a relatively older film. I think I was in college or just graduated from college. That was, gosh, 20 years ago or so when this film came out. Uh, but after seeing the bloody massacre at the bride's wedding, Earl McGraw uses an understatement when he says, "It would appear someone objected to this union and wasn't able to hold their peace." Well, when someone objects to a union at a wedding and isn't able to hold their peace, they call out, they say, "Stop the wedding," right? They don't kill everyone in the venue, right? So that was definitely an understatement. That person had a little more problem than, or a little bigger problem than with just the wedding, right? In order to kill everyone at the wedding. All right, we also have something called an oxymoron, and an oxymoron is a single phrase that combines two apparently contradicting elements. It's a type of paradox, and when you read one of the one of the poems this week, you will see that paradox is used. Oxymoron is just sort of a mini paradox. A paradox can be a phrase or a word or a line or a situation that seems contradictory or self contradictory but reveals a kind of truth, while an oxymoron is a type of paradox that uses just a single phrase. So John Donne uses an oxymoron in the line, "Oh, miserable abundance. How can, if you have an abundance of things, can you be miserable? Oh, beggarly riches. So if you have riches, how can you be beggarly? How can you be as if you were a beggar, right? So, oh, miserable abundance. Oh, beggarly riches." Likewise, if you confront a friend about a recent lie he or she told and get no response, you might say to that friend, "The silence is deafening." Well, how can silence be deafening, right? But you actually mean, that does have a meaning. We do say that. The silence was deafening. So the silence really brought my point home. You see oxymorons all around. Jumbo shrimp, um, there are several different phrases that we use that use oxymorons. Now, what I want you to do is, I want you to get out your journal, and I'm not sure how many of these there are, but I'm going to give you a line, and I want you to tell me what the figure of speech used in each of the following is. So I won't have you stop and include these online. I'll just let you look at them and write in your journal, and then we'll move through these pretty quickly. I don't want this video to be 500 hours long. So let's look at the first one. What if I said Busy as a bee. That's a simile, of course. It uses the word as. So if a comparison uses the word like or as, it's a simile. What if I said, lend me your ear? So, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ear. I think this comes from maybe Julius Caesar and the Shakespeare play and Mark Antony's speech. Don't quote me on that unless you look it up. Lend me your ear. That's a metonymy because you're substituting ear here for attention. So lend me your ear, give me your attention, listen to what I say. But ear, you're referring to ear, but you really mean give me your attention. So that's a metonymy. If you said synecdoche, it's not quite a synecdoche because remember, synecdoche is dealing with referring to the whole using a part or referring to a part using the whole. So ear really isn't part of attention, and attention isn't really, or attention isn't really part of a whole. Oh, I gave this one away earlier. I just bought a rad new set of wheels. This is the synecdoche, using wheels to refer to an entire car. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, and we all know who said that. Elvis Presley. That is a metaphor. Hired hands. So I need some people to work, so I need to get a few hired hands. Again, I think this is a synecdoche because you're referring to the hands only when you really need an entire worker, right? So you need an entire person that you're going to hire to help you do a certain job. So sometimes they're called hired hands. That's a synecdoche. So what if I said the rise in poverty will open a Pandora's box of crime? That is an illusion because I'm referring to Pandora's box, that myth where the woman opens the box, the woman Pandora opens the box, and all the evils of the world escape, and something else escapes from the box. What is it? Do you remember? It's hope, right? Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. That, of course, is from Forrest Gump. What is it? It's an example of a simile. Time marches to the beat of its own drummer. I think that's personification because time, which is a concept, uh, doesn't march, it doesn't have feet, doesn't have ears to hear the drummer, but we're giving it those human qualities. So it's personification. All right, let's look at some more. This is from one of my favorite songs by Leonard Cohen. The sun pours down like honey on Our Lady of the Harbor is what it's saying. So it's talking about the sun pouring over the Statue of Liberty. You might check out, if you've not listened to the songs of Leonard Cohen, you might check out Leonard Cohen. He's a pretty good, some pretty good songs. This is from a song called Suzanne, if I didn't say that before. But I think this is a simile because why? He uses the word like. And this is by Simon J. Ortiz, and he says, and the land was a pretty woman smiling at us. So the land was a pretty woman. So this is a metaphor, right? Or what else could it be? I think this is a metaphor. You could also say this is personification, right? Because land can't smile. So the land was a pretty woman is the metaphor. Smiling at us is personification. So there's both of those. If you said either one, or if you said both, then you're right on. So this is not a line, but let's say the raven from Poe's poem, The Raven. that represents death and loss. So, quoth the raven nevermore. That is a symbol, right? The raven represents a raven, but he also represents something greater than just a raven, death and loss, and the speaker of the poem's experience of those. I walked abroad and saw the ruddy moon lean over a hedge. This is by T.E. Holm, I guess. I'm not sure. So I saw the ruddy moon lean over a hedge. So this is personification. I'm so hungry I could eat a zebra. This is actually something that a student said in one of my classes once, and it cracked me up a little bit. So, well, I'm so hungry I could eat a zebra. That's hyperbole. Well, I don't know. Maybe you are so hungry you could eat a zebra, but most of the time when people say, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse or something like that, they do not mean they could really consume an entire horse. They're just very, very hungry. I wandered lonely as a cloud. Simile, excellent. What about the golden snitch from Harry Potter that represents the enlightenment every seeker aims for? You could say the golden snitch is a symbol, right? You could say that J.K. Rowling is using it as a symbol. And what about the world treated him badly? I think that is a synecdoche. The entire world didn't treat him badly, just the part he came into. So it's using the whole to represent the part. Now, you could have also said that this was hyperbole, and that would have been correct, right? The entire world didn't treat him badly, just this few people. But you could say that that is a hyperbole as well. But I like to say that it's a synecdoche. All right, let's look at one more group, I think. His eyes were as big as saucers. We're using as again, so of course this is a simile. I had to wait in the station for 10 days, an eternity. So this is from Joseph Conrad. And again, 10 days is not an eternity, so this is a hyperbole. I have to have this operation. It isn't very serious. I have this tiny little tumor on the brain. That's by J.D. Salinger. Well, if you have a tumor on the brain, that is very serious. So I think this is an understatement. Oops, don't look at that. I went too far. So this is from Hosier, I guess. But this is from a song, My Lover's Got Humor. She's the giggle at a funeral. So my lover's got humor. I'm not going to sing. Well, I'm not going to sing because then you'll probably drop the class. But she's the giggle at a funeral, right? Do you know that song? Have you heard that? This, I think, is a metaphor, and I gave it away. He is the only honest thief. So an honest thief, it's an oxymoron, right? O cunning love, with tears thou keepest me blind. So Shakespeare here is talking to love. Is love a person? Is love something you can talk to? No. So I think this is apostrophe. Lucille Clifton, who we read one of her poems, What the Mirror Said, she says in another poem, you wet brown bag of a woman. So she's actually saying this woman is a wet brown bag. So I think that's a metaphor. And then Dave Matthews says, sweet like candy to my soul. Sweet like candy. Of course, that's a simile. And here's a list of works cited and consulted. I hope that you found this helpful, and I will see you in the next video.